Welcome, everyone. We're here tonight for our joint Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor fisheries discussion. And we'll just wait a moment here until we seem to have everybody in attendance, and then I will get started. Thanks.
Okay, it looks like everybody that was in the waiting room has now successfully transferred over, and it looks like we've leveled off.
Okay, thank you, Leah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Marlene Wagner. I am the agency's South Coast Policy Lead, and we are here tonight to have a fisheries discussion to talk about the 2025 salmon season in both Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor, and to hear your questions and suggestions for fisheries proposals this year. Next slide. So before we dig in, I will briefly run through our public meeting guidelines and etiquette expectations. Upon joining the virtual meeting, your microphone is muted automatically. If you have any technical issues during the meeting, notify us in the chat and we will help you. The chat is only going to be monitored for technical assistance. Public comments are welcome and will be rotated between the in-person and virtual attendees, except that doesn't apply tonight. Of course, we're all virtual. To ask a question or make a comment, please use your device's raise hand feature. If you're on the phone, dial *9. On Zoom, if using a computer, click the hand reactions icon at the bottom of your screen. And during the comment period, the host will enable you to unmute yourself. You can then unmute yourself by pressing the mute button on your device or dialing *6 on your phone. Keep discussions focused on the agenda items and questions at hand. Next slide. Offensive, disrespectful, or derogatory language, including profanity, personal attacks, threats, or insults towards individuals, governments, or organizations is strictly prohibited. Assume positive intentions from those speaking and listen respectfully. To ensure a balanced discussion, please limit your comments to 2 minutes with one clarifying follow-up question. Provide constructive feedback regarding the fisheries in which you participate, and remember that the most compelling comments are those that pertain to the topics under discussion. Staff may close public comment to stay on schedule with the agenda or to provide others who still need to comment with an opportunity to speak. This meeting will be recorded and posted online. And if you have any further questions or comments, you may submit them in written format on our public comment webpage, and there's a link there on the screen to get there. Next slide. So here's our presentation overview, and I'll start tonight with the meeting purpose. I'll go through staff introductions, review the regional North of Falcon calendar and the APA process. I'll walk through the ocean options, and then we will review our forecasts and management objectives for Willapa Bay, Grays Harbor, Queets and Quinault Rivers, and present the NELF runs, which is just this year's new abundances modeled with last year's fisheries. Next slide. So the purpose for our meeting tonight is to provide information for public input, answer any questions about that information and data, and then most importantly, we're here to hear fishery suggestions from you regarding our 2025 salmon season. Next slide. So here's the team that works on setting the salmon seasons for us in Willapa Bay and Grays Harbor. On the left, our intergovernmental team is led by Kyle Addix, WDFW Intergovernmental Salmon Manager. I'm excited to introduce a new staff member, Jake Rice, in the role of Statewide Salmon and Steelhead Manager. I report to Jake as the South Coast Fisheries Lead, and I work alongside Barb McClellan, our South Coast Marine Biologist, and Jana Goulding, our South Coast Marine Area Biologist. On the right, our Region 6 management team has a new leader whom many on this call will likely remember from when he was in my position. A big welcome back to Chad Herring, our new Region 6 Fish Program Manager. He heads up the team that includes the fish biologist for the Grace Harbor District, which is currently vacant. And that's because Mike Scharf has taken on a new role on the intergovernmental team, but he's really working overtime to help us through North of Falcon in an acting role, for which we are very grateful. Also in Grace Harbor, we have a new area biologist, Amy Edwards, who has done quite a lot of work with spawning ground surveys on the Skagit, and most recently was working with our science program on the Chehalis. We also have Kim Figler-Barnes as our longtime area biologist in Grace Harbor. Over in Willapa Bay, we have district fish biologist, Dr. Erin Whitcup, and she works with Nick Van Buskirk, who has been with us for a few years now as the area biologist, conducting our spawning ground surveys and escapement estimates. Next slide. So these next couple of slides detail our 2025 North of Falcon public meetings that are likely of most interest to this group. We had our statewide forecast kickoff meeting on February 28th. We just wrapped up the first Pacific Fishery Management Council meeting in Vancouver, Washington. We're here on March 12th for our joint Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor Fisheries discussion number 1. Next slide. On March 19th, we will have our North of Falcon meeting number 1 in Olympia. This is going to be a hybrid meeting with the opportunity to attend in person. On March 25th, we have our Linwood meeting, or North of Falcon 2. We're going to meet back here on April 2nd for our second Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor joint fisheries discussion. At this meeting, we will show model outputs from fishery suggestions that we received tonight and also on our public comment portal. And finally, PFMC2 is going to be held this year in San Jose, California from April 10th to 15th. If you're interested in finding out about other regional meetings or statewide meetings, the entire North of Falcon schedule can be found at the link on the bottom of these slides. Next. So as we close in on fishing seasons and regulations for the upcoming year, we also go through a formal rulemaking process called the Administrative Procedure Act. The process this year actually started back in January when we filed the CR 101, which is a code reviser form for the public that we are about to start rulemaking. The specific coastal commercial in Willapa Bay and Grace Harbor recreational CR 101s were filed on January 21st. And after that, the process is relatively straightforward. After a minimum of 45 days, we can file a CR 102, which is the actual proposed rules we are considering adopting. At this point, after a minimum of 35 days, we have a public hearing and accept written comments on the proposed rules. We consider making modifications to these proposed rules based on comments received or errors identified in the proposed rules in the CR 102. And then we move to a CR 103P and concise explanatory statement filing, and the CR 103P will be published, will be the actual rule that is adopted. And then the director will review and consider adopting it. It's published to the Washington State Register after 14 days, and the rule becomes effective 31 days after the filing of that CR 103P. So importantly here, between the CR 101 filing in January and the CR 102 filing later, we have a very large public process, and that is this North of Falcon process. So this is where we have our long string of meetings that I just discussed, and where we really take the bulk of our public input. As we move forward filing the proposed regulations in the 102, we will have already gone through this big public process so that those rules, they are as close to the final rules as they can be. Although we will still take additional comment and have a public hearing to consider changes to those. Next slide, please. So here are our, the 3 proposed options for non-treaty ocean quotas and guidelines for 2025. For alternative 1, we have 122,500 Chinook and 120,000 coho. For alternative 2, we have 112,500 Chinook and 115,000 coho. For alternative 3, we have 92,500 Chinook and 85,000 coho. Individual port quotas associated with each alternative are available on our website, webpage on the press release, which also has links to the PFMC webpage for more details. Members of our distribution list also received this press release in their inboxes today. Hatchery, Chinook, and coho are up over recent years in the Columbia River, and the range of ocean alternatives reflects a balance between that and the conservation of other natural origin stocks. And so with that, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Erin to go through Willapa Bay forecasts. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Marlene. Next slide, please. All right, so now I'll be discussing the 2025 forecast for the Willapa Bay for our salmon species. And I'll start with Chinook. We are forecasting a natural origin return of 2,338 fish of Chinook and a hatchery origin return of 33,419 for a total of 35,757. For some perspective on this forecast, the natural origin forecast is below our escapement goal. And this is a decrease compared to last year's returns, which were around 3,300 fish. However, this forecasted value is on par with what we have seen in several recent years, for example, 2022 and 2023. So it is similar to some recent years, but it's less than last year. We're also projecting here a few thousand less hatchery fish than we had last year as well. For coho, I'll be presenting the Ocean Age 3 forecast, and these are all the fish that return to the ocean before any are harvested by fisheries. So it includes both spawners and all harvest that has yet to occur. And for natural origin fish, we are forecasting 28,037. For hatchery origin, we're forecasting 93,718 for a total of 121,755. For some context here, this forecast would put us above our Pacific Fishery Management Council goal of 17,200 naturally spawning fish. And that goal includes both natural origin and hatchery origin. It's any fish that spawns out in the gravel. And we are predicted also, this hatchery return would be similar to the overall hatchery run size we saw last year if it materializes. So this would be a strong coho return. For chum, we are forecasting 92,276 natural origin chum returning and 2,188 hatchery chum for a total of 94,464 total. And these values would put us above our escapement goal of 35,400 for natural origin chum. And last year we did see a very high return of chum with around 152,000. And that's the largest we've seen in at least the last 10 years. So this return we're projecting is not as high as last year, but in the perspective of recent years is still a strong return. All right, next slide, please. I'll briefly discuss our management objectives in the Willapa Bay. For Chinook, if the number of natural origin spawners for either the Willapa or Nassau rivers is less than the spawner escapement goal in 3 out of 5 years, which it has been, and if the preseason forecast is less than 120% of our tributary level escapement, then we manage to this 20% natural origin impact rate for Willapa and Nassau rivers. So that is our overarching management that we need to hit, and we have been hitting that and plan to keep planning our fisheries to hit that in the future. So that's our goal there for Chinook. For chum, we have a 35,400 natural origin escapement goal, as I said in the last slide. And for coho, we have a total natural spawning goal of 17,200 through the Pacific Fishery Management Council. We also have a natural origin goal. It's directed by the commission of 13,600, but the PFMC goal is our overarching goal that we have to hit. And with that, I'll pass it off to Barbara McClellan.
Hi, everyone. My role tonight is I'm going to walk you through the output of our NALF model. So if you could go to the next slide. So just for everyone's clarification, NALF stands for New Abundances Last Year's Fisheries. So this model run includes the new 2025 preseason salmon forecast together with last year's commercial and recreational fisheries. So on the screen, you can see a table with the model output. Starting on the left side, you'll see the title of the model run. The next two columns are the natural origin Chinook impact rates based on the new abundances and last year's fisheries in this particular model. So our management objective, if you recall from the previous slide that Aaron spoke to, is not to exceed 20% natural origin Chinook impacts for Willapa and Nassau rivers separately. So based on this model, the expected natural origin Chinook impact rate for Willapa River is 14.9%, and for Nassau River, it's at 16.6%. So the next three columns are the expected escapement from this particular model. For Chinook, the natural origin escapement goal is 4353, and in this model, the expected natural origin escapement is 1984. We don't typically make our natural origin escapement, but that is in our overarching priority when it comes to management objectives. So for coho, as Aaron mentioned in the previous slide, the natural spawning escapement goal for Willapa Bay Basin and the goal that is accepted through PFMC is 17,200 fish. The natural origin escapement goal, which is an internal objective from commission guidance, is 13,600 coho. Based on this model run, we expect to escape just over 52,000 naturally spawning coho and just over 15,000 natural origin coho. For chum, the basin-wide escapement goal is 35,400 fish, and the expected chum escapement in this model run with these fisheries is just over 52,000 fish. So the remaining columns of this table have to do with the harvest, expected harvest by species and by sector, either commercial or recreational. And in the last four columns, you'll see the percentages of those expected harvests divided up by species and by sector. So for Chinook, and remember, Chinook, we are marked selective for Chinook in Willapa Bay, so these data represent hatchery harvest only. This model estimates about 4,245 Chinook will be harvested by the recreational sector, and just over 5,300 Chinook will be harvested by the commercial sector. That breaks down to about 44% of the total harvested from the commercial side, and almost 56% of the total harvest will be from the commercial side. For coho, this model estimates about 6,236 coho will be harvested from the recreational sector, which is approximately the 14.9% of the total harvest. And this model estimates approximately 35,400 coho will be harvested from the commercial sector, which is about 85% of the total expected harvest. So for chum, the recreational sector doesn't tend to harvest many chum, so the expected harvest for this model is about 143 fish. But for the commercial sector, the expected harvest is just over 42,000. I didn't add the percentages breakdowns because the chum harvest is so small and so low. So now I will pass it over to Mike to walk through Grace Harbor.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Mike Scharf. I am the former District 17 North district biologist, but here to help and glad to be here. Next slide, please. I'm going to present the Grace Harbor forecasts separately for Chehalis and for tulips. The Chinook forecasts are very similar to what we had last year. Spring Chinook is just a little bit over the goal of 1,400. And the fall Chinook is just about what we saw last year, but I want to point out that 10,497 is less than 10% above the goal. So little concern there. And as the Willapa Bay coho forecasts were presented, these are also ocean age 3 abundance, 58,043 natural Chehalis coho, a little bit lower than last year. But we have a little bit higher forecast for the hatchery component at 63,627. This is a bit of a reflection on the increased production coming out of Bingham Creek. Next slide. On the hub tulip side, again, similar to what we saw last year, a little bit lower on the natural fall Chinook at 3,727, and a little bit lower on the hatchery side of the Chinook at 2,170. this is reflecting on kind of a short, we missed the release goal a couple of years ago, so we're starting to see the effect of what happened then. And then again, on our coho, the natural coho number is a little bit low, but we're seeing a pretty good return for hatchery fish at 24,178. And for chum, there are a lot of them forecasted to come back, and it's something I don't see as being a limiting stock, but at 51,913, it would be the largest on record. This is kind of a reflection of some pretty good recruits per spawner and some big brood years that are starting to show their production. So lots of chum. Next slide, please. And we're going to jump into Queets and Quinault just a little bit and just show the coho forecasts. The Quinault numbers are very similar to what we've seen in the past. 26,000 natural and 37,304 on the hatchery side. Queets River, the natural forecast is a little bit lower than last year at 11,122. And a hatchery forecast of 9,736. Okay, next slide. So what are we looking at in management objectives in Grays Harbor? Even though we have a forecast for spring Chinook that's over the goal, it isn't by very much. The stock is still under review in a petition to be listed under ESA. There also is some concern with the genetic makeup of this stock. We know that there is hybridization going on. What we don't know is this getting worse, or is it just something that naturally occurs? So we feel it's pretty important to maybe look at this stock and be very conservative when we think about fisheries on there. And at this point in time, I don't think it would be a good idea to have a fishery on the spring Chinook and the Chehalis this year. For our fall Chinook, we're going to manage to the escapement goal of 13,326. And that is the basin-wide goal. Again, a little bit of concern in that the forecast isn't very much, it's less than 10% of the goal. And as I show you in the NOFT model run, we're going to have some work to do. And for coho, again, we have an escapement goal of 35,400. That's our management objective. There is also a management objective in the Pacific Fish Salmon Treaty that is based on the forecasted ocean abundance. And right now, with what we have forecasted to hit the ocean, that rate is 50%, basically around 50%. To put things into context, last year's fisheries resulted in a 57% harvest rate on natural coho for Grays Harbor Basin. And I think in the NOFT, I'll talk about where we sit right now, but I will save that for the next slide. For chum, lots of chum. This is not going to be our limiting stock this year, so I won't spend any time on chum. And on Queets, we brought Queets coho up because last year we listed it as an overfished stock. This was based on PFMC abundances, and we want to just state that a rebuilding plan was developed. It was accepted by the council, and that stock is now considered in a rebuilding status. So that's kind of the next step up. And so if we continue to see decent returns of coho to the spawning grounds, that then will be dropped down to a recovered status. Okay, next slide. So here is the result of the NOFT. And as Barbara explained, this is last year's new abundance, last year's fisheries. And I've kind of condensed and shortened up the slides that we typically have been showing just because it was very large and cumbersome. And I think this is a little quicker and neater to look at. We still have the red boxes and they're everywhere. And basically what it is saying is that with the updated ocean quotas and last year's terminal fishing package, we will not make the escapement goal for natural spawning Chinook or coho in Grays Harbor. And you'll also see that currently we're sitting at about 56% total exploitation rate on Grays Harbor natural coho. So again, our target here is about 50%. So we've got a little bit of work to do. I'm not going to go over and look at chum because we're going to escape over 100,000. So that would be kind of neat. But anyways, this just gives you an idea of where we are in some of the management objectives that we have to work with. So with that, I think that concludes our part of the discussion, and then we go into questions.
Okay, it looks like we have a hand up. Our first hand is from a phone number ending in 932. I have prompted you to unmute.
This is Ross Beck. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Ross.
Oh, good. Comment on Chinook for Willapa Bay. I know that you're allowed a 20% impact, but it makes a big difference who's applying the impact. And the tangle net impact on released Chinook is about pushing 30%. It's 40% for a wreck. And also, we're supposed to have some kind of a priority for recreational fishers for Chinook. We do not have that for coho or chum. And so I would like you to consider, and the question would be why I haven't considered. I mean, in other words, the NALF is saying you can't do the NALF, I guess. But if we would allow more Chinook to get into the river, okay, the impact on both the Hazel and the Nema, we allow more Chinook to get in the river, we can harvest more hatchery Chinook, less impact on the wild Chinook than we do killing them out front. And so, this approach, and we used to boat fish up there in the north end of the bay, but it takes 7.3 days in a boat for someone with a rod to catch a Chinook up there that they can keep. And so that fishery is basically over, except for people who love boating. And so my suggestion or question is, shouldn't we consider raising the impact on wild Chinook in the Willapa Bay, raising the impact for recreational fishers and lowering it for nets? And that way we can harvest more Chinook and kill less wild Chinook. That should be a consideration. Otherwise, the whole thing is just starting with an anti-sport fish approach towards Chinook. So that's my case.
Thank you, Mr. Barkhurst. I think I caught most of that and really appreciate your comments and thoughts there.
Okay, thank you, Ross. We don't have another hand at the moment. So just a reminder for folks on the phone, *9 to raise your hand. And if you have, depending on your Zoom, it's probably a raise hand function, but it could be a reactions tab at the bottom of your screen. Our next hand is from a phone ending in 793. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, it's Andy. I just had a request that you maybe you could just process the numbers and see if it's a viable request. But maybe after October 1st, instead of running 2 chambers on our recovery boxes, we just run 1. It's a lot easier for the smaller boats and the stability factor if the weather comes up. So I would just like to see that process through and see if that's a viable request. As for the rest of it, everything looks good, and until we can run some models and see what the tribe's doing, we'll get back to you with further notice. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. Our next hand is from Garrett. Garrett, go ahead. Oh, we
All right,
can't hear you. We can
Can you
hear
hear
you.
me?
Yes.
All right. Um, regarding Grace Harbor fisheries, obviously we're gonna need to, once we have some more numbers and whatnot, adjusting those fisheries to try and meet escapement on our wild coho and Chinook. A request for the upper basin from like Porter upriver to Borston Centralia is to make sure we can get our coho retention in November, and if we can do December like we did last year, that'd be awesome. And if I know we're probably gonna have to trim some stuff, so maybe if we can do one wild coho and one hatchery, and then going to like one hatchery only coho after the end of November. Obviously we need some more numbers before we can sketch all that out, but yeah, that's all I've got for now. Thank you for all you guys' work.
Thank you, Garrett. And that was our last hand for the moment. Just a reminder, the reactions tab at the bottom of your screen, or it's a little hand that says raise hand.
If I may kind of speak up and maybe hopefully get some people to think, we would really like to hear, and I know it's early and we just showed you some NALFs, and we know that there's going to be some adjustments. But with what we've said this evening, does anybody have just kind of any recommendations of fisheries that they think they would like to see? And in particular, we know we're going to have to kind of reduce some things. What are some of the priorities that you guys have that you would like to see us keep, or suggestions on what might help reduce our numbers a little bit? Just kind of looking for those things in tonight's meeting, and certainly as we continue to go on, anytime you guys have ideas, please send it to us.
Okay, and you got another hand up, Mike. Caller ending in 793. Go ahead.
This is Andy again, so I'll take the time again. So in the models for both Grays Harbor and Willapa, since the fleet reduction a couple years ago, how far, it's hard to do in the NALF right now, but where are we at with it this year, considering the fleet reduction with the process?
So I think I can address Grace Harbor. We update the model each year with the most current year's information, and definitely we're seeing that the rates are going down, and it is a result of fewer boats out on the water. So yeah, the model is going to lag a little bit, but it is still it's still responsive to those lower effort levels.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Our next hand is from Eric. Eric, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. Mike, you wanted to comment on potential seasons. Grays Harbor, looking at the NALF slide there a while back that showed all the reds. I would like to throw out yep, that right there. I'm all about extending the season as much as possible. If it means going down to one wild coho, October, November, when we've done it in years past, it's never ideal, of course, but I mean, I'd rather have that and be able to fish than keep two wilds and getting done early. That November, potentially into December fishery is huge. So I guess I'm on board with one wild if it ends up turning that way. So that's all. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Our next hand is from Dave. Dave, go ahead.
I got a question for Mike. Is the Grays Harbor Chinook intercept by Alaska and BC pretty much similar in percentage as it's been the last few years?
Yes, it is.
Near 50%?
Yes.
And is the agency doing anything to kind of address that?
It is something that has come up more on the council floor than it has in the past. And so I would say that, yes, it's getting a little bit more voice. I cannot speak to the full extent of the agency's work on that, but from my seat, I hear it more in that upper level than we have in the past.
Well, yeah, everybody's without any harvest model runs, so it's a little hard to do anything. Okay, got that. But here's the thing. I was told that Willapa is similar to Grays Harbor in that intercept rate. Is that correct? Percentage wise.
Yeah, I think they're similar up and down the coast. So the whole coastal fall Chinook numbers along the Washington coast do get intercepted at a large number up there in Alaska.
Yeah.
So they're all pretty similar.
Well, and I'm bringing this up because there's not a lot of harvest model stuff. Is simply this: the Chinook, that intercept controls the remaining fish, controls Grays Harbor fisheries, because the Quinn can't be selective, and the minute because those fish are all gone before they get here, the Quinn end up having to back up to get their shares, and that puts everybody right in October, and all in the same time frame. And if in Willapa, they got a small wild run to start with. When you look at 50% of it being gone and how they have to fish, that's absolutely just creaming them down there. Okay, I mean because there's that small of a natural proportion, and so for Grays Harbor, though, I mean, that's pretty darn critical, because basically that backs the wreck fishers up, and everybody gets crammed into about a 6-week window, and it doesn't really work all that well. I mean, especially for the nation. I mean, I don't know how they get by all those, how they do it. And I'm just saying it's one of those things that people are aware of, but never gets discussed much. And that is putting the bite on Grays Harbor. But whether you be commercial, Quinn, or wreck, that intercept is absolutely just gunning us out the door. I mean, and I would wish that somebody in the agency would speak up, because you're never going to get it out of any of our elected representatives, that's for sure. So that's all for now. I'll shut up.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Our next and last hand for now is Lance. Lance, go ahead.
Okay. You get me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. I was worried with no profanity that my First Amendment right, the freedom of speech, was getting taken away, but I won't do any profanity. So I just wanted to say, thank you from this end of the bay, from last year's fishery to the management program that ran it. There was some days when we had abundance of fish, and we had quite a bit of surplus coho and obviously quite a bit of surplus chum that we were able to get out with some extra days, and that was appreciated by us on the south end of the bay, that to make those adjustments where they were needed, and hope that we can continue with that, looking at the fishery as it comes in, as we look at these predictions. We all know their guesstimates, and we hope they come in stronger than they say. They may not. We've definitely lost days in the past, so but hope that we can continue working down that road of looking at the fishery when the fish are actually here and not our guesstimate in April. And I know that's how this policy runs, but until we actually see what we have, it's pretty tough. So would just like to extend that thank you. And I guess, once we get this information and start running models, then we'll have ideas of fishery. But for now, we're kind of running blind. But thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Our next hand is from Eric. Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, different watershed question, the Queets. The last several years, the wreck fishery has been cut off at the end of September. And I noticed you mentioned in the earlier discussion or in the presentation that it's in a rebuilding status. Couple of questions. What's the trajectory with that rebuild? Do you see a day where we used to get October to fish also, if not wilds, but at least the hatchery, those salmon river fish, because there's still plenty of those around in October. But right now, at least the rec side, we get cut off at the end of September. So is there a day coming when we might get some October opportunity? That's my question. Thanks.
Yep. Well, we actually allowed that last year. We were able to get back to the traditional September through November fishery, and so we were able to do that again last year. And that's kind of our starting point this year. We'll have to see how things go. That forecast is down a little bit, so we're getting kind of tight to that bottom end of the escapement goal, and the rebuilding objective is to have a 3-year GME that achieves, I won't get into great detail, but a certain specific number. And it's still kind of tight there. Much like Grays Harbor, we've seen some decent returns, but not really great ones. So I think at this point in time, my starting point is September through November. Just like we had last year.
Okay, one thing though, if I remember correctly though, any retention ended at the end of September. You could catch and release, but there was no retention after September. I'm going off the Olympic National Park rigs.
So yeah, in the park is different than, and when I think of things, and sorry, got to clarify things. For me, I managed basically a little piece of the salmon and then the clear water. Okay. And then the park manages the Queets, and it's their policy that you release all wild fish no matter where you're at. And so when I say we had the season last year through November, that's primarily on the salmon and the Queets or the Clearwater River. Who knows what's going to happen this year on the park? Right now that they are dealing with some internal issues. So that's a stay tuned. Let's see what's going to happen. But as for the Clearwater and the salmon, right now, I'm hoping that we can keep our September through November fishery.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Eric. Our next hand, he was having some issue raising his hand, so if others are as well, you can message me in the chat. Steve Gackey. Steve, go ahead. Steve, I have prompted you to unmute. Steve, are you there? Okay, we will go to the next name and I will call on you again. Cindy. Cindy, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right, good. Hey, I'm coming at this from a whole different perspective than what has been discussed so far this evening. I'm a landowner along the Naysel River, and we own a large chunk of property on both sides of the river above the bridge, the Highway 4 bridge. And I just wanted to express a few things that go on during the fishing season here. Probably the biggest thing this year has been the drift boats that start up the river and make their way down. And I was wondering if there was any discussion about how we were going to treat the drift boats. This is a very, very small river, and it's just funny to watch these drift boats go down. Rarely do I see a drift boat going down the river. They're usually parked on my property and they're out of their boats fishing off the side of the bank. And I guess I just don't understand. It's just a weird thing. And I know that the drift boats need to be addressed. I would prefer that they not be on the Naysel River at all. If I could have any input at all about that, I would strongly urge you to take the drift boats off the Naysel River. This river is just too small for them. And besides the fact that they are going down the river, I live on North Valley Road, and so to get up to where they want to let the boats out, they have to go up my road, and they're traveling at 4 o'clock in the morning at about 60 miles an hour on a 25-mile-an-hour road. And so I'm finding that they're just a big hassle. And one of these days they're going to run over, they're going to hit animals, they're going to hit my dogs, they're going to do something that is going to not be a good situation. So the drift boats are one thing. The other thing is more of a question I have for you. If I have people on my riverbank, which I'm told I have to allow, what happens if they trip on a stick or they fall over a log and they break a leg? Can they come after me? And it's a question, I mean, can you answer it right now for me?
Hey Cindy, this is Erin Whitcup. I can speak to some of your questions. First about the drift boats. Thanks for bringing this up. This is something we've gotten a comment about for several years with access issues, concerns about parking, trespassing, trash, there's all sorts of issues. Not to mention, yeah, the size of the river. It's something we talked about last year, and we want to keep having conversations this year and keep getting public proposals about. It is complicated. There's a lot of different interests and different people want to fish different ways on the river, and we try to manage based on conservation concerns as well as access. So there's a lot to weigh, and we look forward to keep getting public feedback throughout this process as we make a decision. In terms of concerns about people on your property and liability, I think consulting with our enforcement and probably local police officers would be my best bet, not knowing where exactly your property lines are and whether they're on your property or not, if they're in like underneath the high water mark. So I don't know if any of my colleagues have a more concrete answer, but I would say we can contact you with someone from our enforcement and also calling your local authorities too.
Well, I guess here's you just mentioned it. If you're below the water line, and you're fishing below the water line, but yet it's still on the bank of my property, where does that put me? Where's the liability? I mean, can you assure me right now that if they are below the water line and something happens to them, that I am not liable?
Unfortunately, I don't think any of the staff on this call are your legal best experts to give you a straight answer, and I'm sorry about that. But
All right. Well, I think it would be good for you to know that, because it's a huge deal to us. That's why we don't allow people in our fields and whatnot, but along the water line, that's a whole nother issue that I don't know who has the answer for, as with there are many other issues that we don't have answers for. The only other thing that I want to mention to you is keeping the river open. I'm just totally against that. Waiting till October is probably the best bet, and I just would really encourage you to keep those timeframes limited. It's not only good for the fish, but it's good for property owners because we have to watch it all the time. But anyway, I appreciate what you've done tonight and the information that you've given us, and I hope you can take my my comments back with you, and we can get an answer on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Our next hand is from Lance. Lance, go ahead.
Takes me a while to think up questions. So one of the other things I wanted to bring up was when we're modeling for the fishery, whether it, obviously we model together for a 20% impact rate, but I would like to make sure we go back to that policy and model these fisheries for 20% on the Chinook as we pull up. I think it was slide 14 Barbara had. Like I say, the numbers that we guesstimate on, and I know everybody does the best job they can, we haven't been close at all. If you look at the last 4 or 5 years in the Willapa, we've been way low, and we seem to have started building a buffer of 2% or 3% or 2.5%, whatever it is, and bringing our modeling down to 18 or 617.5 or whatever it is. I'd like to see us go back and model. I think last year we were ended up on our natural on the south end of the bay at 15, and I don't know if it was 5 or 6 on the other end of the bay. So we're letting a lot of surplus fish go by that we'd like to harvest and not have the hatchery have to deal with. And seems like there's a lot of room for us to do that. If it makes a huge difference in our coho fishery, if we get another % or 2, we can get out a bunch of these coho that are getting surplus. So thank you.
Thank you, Lance. Our next hand and last hand for the moment is Dave. Dave, go ahead.
I got a question for Mike. Did we make escapement in all 3 salmon species last year?
We have not finalized the coho and the Chinook escapements yet. So I can't answer that. I will say, chum, we well exceeded it, and it looks like we have well exceeded the coho escapement. The Chinook one is really, I'm not sure yet. We need to really dig through the numbers and see where it ends up. But I think pretty safe to say that coho and chum exceeded it by a lot, but I'm not sure with the Chinook yet. Spring Chinook also did make the escapement goal, but still working on finalizing the other 2.
Okay. My second question would be, or suggestion, I don't know, whatever you want, is simply this. When we get into the crunching numbers, and we're it's going to happen. Okay. Is this, my preference would be to give up some of the bag limit rather than give up time. Okay. And one thing that I don't understand is when the guys are jack fishing and they get a coho, why on earth we have to turn it loose? That's kind of counterintuitive. There ain't that many adults, but we have adult coho sneak in here in July. I got no idea where they go, but they're around. So, you know, when the guys are fishing jacks, yeah, unless you have a couple problem sites that you're aware of up toward Fuller. But otherwise, the guys, they don't tangle with adult Chinook too much fishing for jacks, but most certainly don't tangle very much with adult coho. And I see no reason to turn an adult coho loose, okay? Unless your concern is it'll attract too many people. And that can, yeah, I was afraid of that one, yeah. But anyway, it's a thought there, because we're limited between it always rains the first week of November, and then you got the tribal netting, and when you get days of the weekend, it gets pretty in October, pretty shaky for above 101. Okay, that's just what it's way things go, unless the fish come in early like they did 3 out of 4 years. I kind of like that, but and one more thing on in the December fishery, there ain't no steelhead, so I really hope nobody's foolish enough to jump up and start squawking steelhead in December. Okay, that's done with Chambers Creek, but the normal time coho outperformed the late cohos considerably. Okay, and my point is this: if you get into a crunch time there in December and the numbers, you know, rather than lose it, go to Mark Select on the coho. That time of year, the water's cold. There's a low mortality, okay? And it's much worse in the summer when it's warm. And rather than lose a bunch of time or opportunity and everything else, just protect the wild fish, which is a concern, and just go to the hatchery ones, because the skookum chuck is releases on the mitigation is late timed. And then you got the Bingham program, okay? And so with those, you know, rather than lose opportunity, you can protect the wild fish in December with a low mortality by simply release a wild one, rather than lose the month, because not as many people fish December as used to, but, you know, it's a good fishery for the people that like it. Also, most of the tourists are gone. So it's usually a few Olympia people and the locals that fish that time of year. Okay, so it's a peaceful time to fish, unlike it is in October and the last part of September, which is a zoo. Okay, and I'm just saying the people shouldn't lose that. If you so, in other words, time over bag limit, and that would apply to December the same way. In other words, protect the fish properly, but don't lose. Just in other words, don't kill the fly with a double barrel shotgun in both barrels, okay? It's just easier to be more selective, I would say. Okay, and that's all, that's it.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you, Dave. Our next hand is from Greg. Greg, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to make some comments on our coho fishery, the commercial coho fishery, and the Willapa there. I would like to, since we've had the fleet reduction and all that, I would really like to see our fishery from the, you know, basically the 15th of September on in the coho fishery. I'd like to see it more go back more towards the 7 days a week, you know, since we're only fishing 12-hour days. You have escape, you got a window every day for them to go by us. And I would like to see it because we're having a hard time slowing them down with the effort that we have now in our fleet. And as long as we have some numbers, especially if we have some Chinook numbers left over, to see those that time back to where it was, where we can get some of these coho. Looks like we have the naturals, and I would hope the department would also have the at least one a day for the wrecks on the natural coho. The numbers are there. It seems like that causes a lot of issues in our fishery that weren't needed. So hopefully we'll get away from that. So yeah, that's what I got.
Okay, thank you, Greg. Our next hand, we're going to try Steve again. I think he was ready there for a second. Steve, go ahead and unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, got a new phone. Sorry. Okay. Hey, all my comments will be specific to the Nasal River. So, so I got a few things here. Few suggestions. Mike asked for them. I'm going to give them for you. While enforcement's done what they can to control snagging on the Nasal, their availability is limited due to so many other responsibilities. And that may be further reduced by what's coming with the budget cuts. Since the policy requires a ruly fishery, I have a few suggestions. The first would be to implement a bobber rule below the Highway 4 bridge, from the South Fork to the Highway 4 bridge, August 1st to October 15th, where the bait or lure must be suspended by a float. And I've talked with staff about this, but I hadn't heard back from them, so I don't know where it went. But there should be an exception if this rule goes into effect while trolling from a floating device, or acknowledgement from enforcement that trolling would be exempt if you were going to implement that bobber rule, because that from South Fork up to about Wheeldon Road, it's a prime spot for the guys to troll. So we want to encourage trolling to be allowed. The other thing I'd like you to consider is the current rule for illegally hooked fish is from forward of the rear of the gill plate. And that's where a lot of the fish that are being taken are harvested. We would like to see that rule for the nacelle modified, where a legally hooked fish must be hooked in the mouth. And this would be August 1st to October 15th. If you want to make it to January 31st or whatever, I would be fine with that. But this would be just another way of reducing all those guys that come to the nacelle for the purpose of snagging, and reduce the percentage of a chance that they've got to hook a legally retained fish. One second here. Okay. I do support a rule which would restrict fishing from a floating device. Cindy Pierce talked about this, and Aaron is aware of it, and Chad. Restrict from a floating device from the Highway 4 bridge upstream due to the increased gear conflict. This has exponentially just gotten worse every year. Now, I met with staff on the river in November, but it happened to be two things were going on. The river was up, and we just didn't have many fish in the river. And so they didn't get to see what goes on there at the Big Hill Bridge and whatnot. And there really needs to be some controls put in place here to allow all these landowners that have lived there, a lot of them for all their lives, have to go down and compete for a spot on their own beachfront. So would really like you guys to consider some kind of a rule that would restrict that activity in some way. And then lastly, last year on natural coho, a retention of a natural was allowed on all systems except Willapa and the nacelle. That's contrary to policy. Policy says by aggregate. And, you know, I'm a conservation guy, but there's also an issue of fairness and an issue of following policy. And so I would like to see if, and it appears from looking at your forecast, there is an abundance. So if staff is going to propose retention in the tributaries, that needs to be applied both to the nacelle and the Willapa. Anyway, that's all I've got for now, and appreciate the work you guys do. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Our next hand is from Garrett. Garrett, go ahead.
All right, can you hear me on here?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right. I just wanted to kind of echo some stuff that Dave talked about on the Chehalis coho fishery. Definitely a full season would be much preferred over a larger bag limit. And specifically speaking from, I talked earlier kind of Porter upriver, but kind of that South Elma bridge from South Elma upriver. The months of October and November, we see the majority of that wild run come into the upper basin. So whether it's, if the numbers work, if we can do a 2 fish limit with only 1 being wild a day in October and November would be awesome. Or like, you know, if that's still too high, if we could reduce the total limit to 1 fish a day and do 1 wild per day above South Elma in October, November would be preferred over 2 hatchery. Because during that October, November timeframe from kind of that Elma up to Centralia, when you have all of those wild fish in there, it is very hard at times to find any hatchery fish versus that later run timing of the late Skookumchuck hatchery run. Once we get to from about Thanksgiving to Christmas, kind of that time frame, Thanksgiving to Christmas, even if we drop to just one or 2 hatchery fish and get rid of the wild retention, that Thanksgiving to Christmas time frame in the upper basin, it's a lot easier to find clipped fish. I think that would make more sense. So that's all I got for now. Can't wait to hear what we can come up with. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Garrett. And that was our last hand for right now. Just a reminder, the raise hand, a little tab at the bottom of your screen, maybe a reactions tab. Okay, we have a hand from a phone number ending in 425. Go ahead.
No, it's Francis Estelila. Mr. All hatchery fish must die. So I'd like to follow up on a couple of comments for biologic freebies in terms of managing wild impacts. I'll follow up on Dave Hamilton's comments about the jack fishery. Absolutely pointless to make someone release an adult hatchery coho if you happen to encounter one, especially if you mortally wound it with eggs, which is what most of the guys are using to fish jacks. I think if it's a hatchery fish, that is a biologic freebie. Let those old guys keep that thing, okay? If you're worried about that this is just an adult coho fishery in disguise, make it 1 hatchery adult during that jack fishery. Second one, I'm going to move out in the basin, in the bay. I would be remiss if I did not ask for potential for a hatchery king in the bag. If we're going to offer a 2 fish bag out there, a hatchery king is a biologic freebie. If you guys are worried about meeting a wild coho escapement, you're going to make that guy sort that much longer to try to catch a coho. If he catches a hatchery king, it's game over. He's halfway to his limit. All right? that's one less wild coho that's going to die out there. So again, it's pointless to release that fish. It's a biologic thing. As we'll always say, there's an incentive. If we open hatchery king retention, we're going to attract all this effort, and more people will show up. We have only 1 year of precedent where this argument actually held traction. We actually got the season 2016. We offered a hatchery king. There was no exponential increase in boat traffic in the bay. I was there. First legal hatchery king I was able to put in the boat on the first day I tried. It was October 1st opener. We had some serious conservation concerns. We lost 2 weeks in the bay. It was a 1 fish bag. That guy got a hatchery king. He didn't have to kill a wild coho, which was a conservation concern at the time. So if we're worried about coho, I think it makes sense to offer that this year. And then one more hatchery coho issue is, I agree, 1,518% with Mr. Garrett Moody. Find a way to access those hatchery fish. Again, we're looking for opportunities for biologic freebies when they're passing through in great real-time abundance. That's when you should offer that retention. And so late in the season, there is a 2-week window in there where we seem to get quite a few hatchery fish coming through late November through December. If you're worried about wild escapement, Dave spoke to this as well. If you're gonna make some restrictions, go mark select in that late part of the season. It just makes a lot of sense. It keeps us on the water. Anything we can do to maintain area and time, that's always good for a sports fisherman, because opportunity starts with a bite, right? And you can't get a bite if the river is closed by a date or a certain reach of the river is closed. There's basically zero opportunity at that point. And I think that's all I have. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Our next hand is from, and last hand for right now is from Dave. Dave, go ahead.
There we go. I gotta learn how to click. This is for Mike. Could you throw up that little spreadsheet thing you did at the beginning right there? There we go. Now, I'm only doing this, not arguing with Francis. We argue about it all the time anyways. If you look at this, Mike, as I recall, after the escapement goal got lowered, it was also, and then the agency did it after the tribe did it, but where the hatchery fish are coming out of Satsa Springs, they are counted in the natural spawn, correct? Okay, now everybody can see, if you look at the numbers, the Chinook, our expected escapement is 8428. You start jerking those hatcheries out, and our amount of harvestable is going to get really close on the escapement, okay? This only works with the numbers 8428 that we're seeing, that the total being 11216 is when you learn to look at them not as hatchery and wild, but as the fish, because that's the way they're counted in the escapement, okay? So if we all go out and say we take out 400 hatchery fish, that'd be okay for the guys catching them, but that will raise hell with the chance of making the escapement go, okay? It's just the numbers are so tight. It's that hatchery number. It's actually giving us a tiny bit of pad over the just pure natural escapement. Now, have I got any of that wrong, Mike?
So, yeah, and I thank you for bringing this up, and I probably should have mentioned this earlier. The 12557 is actually the wild escapement plus an estimate of natural spawning hatchery origin fish. Same with the coho side, the 32,927 is wild escapement plus a calculation of hatchery fish that will stray out and spawn in the wild. So that is correct. Dave.
So, not to, I'm not arguing, Doc. It's simply this. We take a bunch of those hatchery fish out and then we have our hooking mortality on the wilds and this and that. We can get seriously tight in there on trying to make escapement, especially if for some chance in a year, say the Chinook come back later and they tangle right up in the coho fishery or this or that. I mean, the numbers we got, and I know when you put the options together, we can all look at them. But bottom line is, this is a real tight wire act you've been running here for about 4 years on Chinook, I think, without going back. And, you know, we've got away with it, but you know, you get away with it until you don't. And usually when you don't, it's really an ugly don't. Okay. I mean, it just gets really bad out there. So I'm just saying everybody should kind of take a deep breath and understand the seasons that Mike has to put together are going to be driven by that Chinook number. Okay. And by that, I mean, it's going to limit when the tribe can fish. It can limit what we can do. And to get after the coho and then a chum, but that don't count that much in this one, it simply is, I would prefer to be a tad bit cautious and not play Russian roulette for the 5th year in a row, because I don't believe luck runs that long. No matter how hard you wish it, sooner or later, the fish will get you. You're not going to outsmart them forever. So I just urge caution and understanding that when we look at escapement, it's going to be the hatchery and wild for the Chehalis, and they're in one big pot. So that don't give you a lot of room. Okay. I mean, when I'm looking, NALF, that's the non-treaty side, right, Mike?
Sorry, no, that's new abundance last year's fishery. So
Okay,
kind
new
of
abundance,
what's
okay.
left. So kind of what's left afterwards. We don't have those numbers up there yet, but they are in the model that I sent out to you. You can still find those.
Okay, that's all I was trying to bring up here so everybody understands what that total number means, okay? And then after that, you guys you're the one who has to make the decision, but I've been around Chinook for so many years, brood stocking and everything else. I never trust the fish. I mean, the fish is going to put it to you every doggone time, and we are not going to keep it all. The last few years, the fish have been up before the nation went in. Okay, almost before they went in. And if the Chinook come back a little late and the tribe drops in for coho, I'm telling you, you can lose some numbers like you've never seen before, and there ain't that many to lose.
I don't know.
Oh, you got a coach.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was not muted.
Okay, that's all I got. I just wanted to bring that up so everybody knows what you're dealing with when the models come out, because you always like to say we got some work to do. I've known a few other people would use other words like holy crap coming to mind and a few others. So, you know, people need to be aware of that limitation right there. And that Alaska intercept that I brought up earlier and BC, that is killing us. That governs everything. Willapa, especially the commercials in Willapa, Grays Harbor. I mean, and by the way, that's not half the harvestable, it's half the damn run, excuse the French. So that's a big deal. And what it does is everything you're seeing right here in this chart for Grace Harbor, and when Mike puts the model together, he's got to deal with that Chinook number. And that is not going to be an easy one, especially when it really drives the Quinault's fishery. And I'll shut up again.
Thanks, Dave, for your comments. Our next hand is from a phone number ending in 932. Go ahead.
Yes, this is Ross. It sort of affects how we deal with the Nazelle. Where do we stand? I haven't found it. Where do we stand on the $16 million mod to the weir at the Nazelle hatchery and all that was budgeted for to go on there? Where does that stand for this year?
Hey, Ross, just a little difficulty hearing you there. Would you mind repeating that?
Yes. The question is, the $16 million hatchery weir on the Nazelle, how is that going? Where does it stand? That sort of affects some of the things we're talking about, especially as far as wild coal getting up the river or not, and so forth. So, is the weir being modified? What's going on there?
Thank you. I think I'll allow Aaron to go ahead and answer that question for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. And Chad might have some more recent updates too, but I believe where we're at is in the permitting process, trying to get the project is still working on moving through the system to try to do this nacelle weir rebuild project. So all systems are go at the moment, but as Kelly Cunningham alluded in our first big public meeting, there are budget challenges, and I'm not sure if anyone else on the staff has more recent updates than me, but as far as I know, things are moving forward.
So is it going to be working this year?
Could you repeat
Yeah.
that?
Sorry, Ross, we're having a hard time hearing you. You want to repeat that?
Is that we're going to be worked on this year? It affects how many wild coal get up the river and so forth and so on. At the Nazelle.
Yeah, so thanks, Ross. I think I'll try and jump in here. The nacelle rebuild is a phased project. We're working through the funding part of phase 2 right now, which I think is for the weir and some of the adult pond work. Obviously the state's budget situation is something we're monitoring closely, and it would be a little too early for me to say in that budgeting process whether we have the funding to move forward with the nacelle rebuild or not at this point in time. I think that's still yet to be kind of figured out in the budgeting process, but it is a high priority of ours, and at least in some of the initial conversations and some of the guidance that's come out of the governor's office, it looks like some of that appropriation through camp would be in place to continue forward with the nacelle rebuild. So that's kind of where we're at right now in the current process.
Oh, I think you got, okay. I think he got muted, but that was a good follow-up. Francis, raise your hand again if you have a follow-up to that. Okay, our next hand is from a phone ending in 423 or 425. Sorry, go ahead. Do you want to unmute?
Unmuted. Hey, it's Francis. Was I called on? I was
Yeah, you can go, Francis.
Okay, so I'll just go back. I understand Mr. Hamilton's concern that you can help pad that natural spawning escapement with hatchery fish. That's how we count them. Very good point. I would just counter with the fact that participation in the bay is pretty small. Peak traffic would be 40 to 45 boats on a Saturday, on a nice day. Chinook encounters, if we're to believe the accuracy of the forecast, it's the best number we have to go with. If hatchery fish are going to show up in proportion to the forecast, hatchery versus wild. That's nearly a 15-to-1 ratio. So the likelihood of even encountering a hatchery fish out there is extremely small. 15-to-1. The average guy on my boat is not going to touch 15 kings to get the one hatchery fish. It is not an enticement. It's a very low probability thing. But again, if you get that fish, it's a biologic freebie. It's extremely low impact. I would just encourage you guys to model it. You guys run a model as if we killed all the kings and you apply a release mortality to it. Well, you can just run that model. 1 out of 15 fish statistically is going to be hatchery, and count that one dead. I think it'd be a pretty easy exercise to model. If it fits in the numbers, I would encourage you to run with it, whether the tribe likes it or not. Because in the end, that's the only thing that's ever stopped this thing from ever happening again since 2016. So I don't want to be, I'm not a conflict kind of guy to start with, but at some point the state's got to buck up, grow a spine, and if it's biologically supportable, we should run with it. Again, hatchery fish, biologic freebies. Thanks. Bye.
Looks like that might be our last hand for the night.
Thank you, Leah. I'm talking slow to see if anybody else might jump in. But in the meantime, I want to remind everybody that we have handout materials on the website for this meeting, including the presentation and model runs. So check that out if you're interested. And if we don't have any other hands, then good evening to everybody. And we'll really look forward to seeing you at our Grace Harbor Willapa Bay Fisheries Discussion 2 meeting in early April. Thanks.
Okay, and it looks like we have one last hand that came up from Dave.
Oh, great. Okay. Take it
Dave,
away,
go
Dave.
ahead. Nope. I think he put his hand back down. I don't see it. I don't see it up anymore. I think that's it for the night.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, everybody. Check out the website for the materials and look forward to seeing you again soon. And thank you, Leah, for your moderation here. Have a good night.